Brian Boyle.
Here.
Lee Doobie. Kim Farah.
Here.
Jason Giard.
Here.
Sheila Lowe's.
Here.
Sarah Mockamer.
Here.
Sean O'Neill. Caitlin Parnell.
Here.
Kristen Savage. Susan Sherman.
Here.
Jennifer Silva.
Here.
David Smith.
Here.
James Sweeney.
Here.
Karen Yasenka.
Here.
Also seated with the board this evening are the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Earl Metzler, CFO Business Administrator, Jeffrey Dowd, and Director of Human Resources, Nancy Louisel.
We also introduce.
Would you like to?
Sure, I'll introduce. Also seated at the board table this evening is Attorney Mark Baroth from Drummond Woodsum. And Mrs. Belcher, could you explain to the board about this large document
Sure.
in the packet?
So included in board packet this evening is confidential information that is not subject to disclosure. It is in board packets for the purposes of allowing you the opportunity to look at it in advance of the non-public session that is coming up later this evening regarding the superintendent's evaluation. We will be collecting that document at the end, or those documents at the end of the session as well.
Okay, thank you very much. If everyone would rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any delegates and individuals to speak before the board?
No one has submitted a form.
All right. So moving on to the approval of the minutes. And I think there are also non-public minutes.
There are, and when you're ready, I can hand those out whenever you're ready.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, Sue. Minutes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Make a motion to approve the public minutes of April 15th, 2019.
Second.
Is there any discussion regarding the minutes? Okay.
On page 2, authorization of SAU board chair. That discussion, if we're going to include the language about Hampstead being denied oversight, I'd like to also include the language that I commented on that night, but in the past, Hampstead denying Timberlane oversight by voting against having the vice chair sign SAU contracts.
Can the,
Oh, sorry, Sue.
can the secretary check the video to make sure that that's the correct statement and add it in there? Or are we just going to allow Mrs. Silva to put that in as her
Did you recall
statement?
I do recall that. I mean, so are you requesting to
So
amend
it's
the
going to be
minutes?
quoted from Mrs. Silva?
Well, I just think if we're going to have that statement in there about Hampstead being denied any oversight of the process, there was more to that discussion that reflected Timberlane's history of having no oversight in the process.
I think it should be quoted as who said it.
That's fine.
So you're not in favor of adding that without listening, having the video?
I just was suggesting that that would make it easier for her to get the quote exactly, but I'm willing to add it in if it says, and Mrs. Silva, or Mrs. Silva commented da-da-da-da-da-da, whatever Mrs. Silva wants to put there. Because just making the blanket statements assumes that the entire Timberlane board agreed with that statement, and I do not agree with that statement. And I
Well-
didn't say it at the meeting, so it shouldn't be in the minutes.
It's not a statement, it's a fact. The Hampstead Board voted against allowing the vice chair to sign contracts with the chair, so I think that's a fact.
I rather it was quoted, whoever said it.
I'm fine with quoting me as saying it, that's not a problem. I mean, unless somebody objects to
These are
having
just
my
minutes.
name
These are just minutes.
associated with it.
Let's keep it going.
I don't think it needs to be put in at all, Jen. However, if you're gonna put it in, put it as your quote.
That's
All right,
fine.
so, Jen, you're making a motion to amend the minutes to reflect the statement that Mrs. Silva, can you say, so that Kathy has it for the amendment? Somebody will need to second that amendment, and then we'll take a vote on the amendment.
Mrs. Silva noted in the past that Hampstead has denied Timberlane oversight by voting against having the vice chair sign SAU contracts.
So that's Mrs. Silva's amendment. Is there a second?
I'll
on that?
second the amendment.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? I'd like to call for a point of order. I'd like to move to weighted voting for the board for the evening.
Okay.
So this vote will be taken by Timberlane as to whether or not they would like to move to weighted voting for the evening. All in favor?
6, 7.
All opposed? Five in favor, 2 opposed. Mrs. Yasenka?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a comment for the record. For the record, I would like to just state that I object to weighted voting being used at every meeting on every single article. Thank you.
So there's an amendment on the floor, and there's a second. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Sweeney, did you have some discussion on that amendment, or was it on the minutes themselves?
It was on the change to the minutes. Not every word that we say is in these minutes. So the conversation that we had, that for roughly 40 years, we went back and forth between vice chair and chair, that's not on here either.
That's right.
So if you want to add, these minutes will be very long and very complicated to document
It's
if we do that.
documented 40 years.
What?
The 40-year comment, that's in there.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
Page 4 of
Page
6 at the bottom.
Must have missed it. I thought it should have been in that same area where we made where I made the motion to amend. Regardless, I'm still gonna say that every comment is not always in the minutes. That's it. Thank you.
All right, is there any further discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, raise your hands. There are 5 Timberlane in favor. All
And 1
opposed?
Hampstead.
Oh, I'm sorry, did we have, I'm sorry, wait, sorry. Everybody in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Sorry, I wasn't looking that way. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor of the amendment. Those opposed to the amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 opposed.
1, is that 2 Timberlane?
2 Timberlane,
And 4 Hampstead.
4 Hampstead opposed.
We're using 7 Timberlane members at 30.9.
Using 7.
You have 7 members. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mhm. We have 17106 in favor, 144.6 opposed.
Sorry, can you say that again,
Sure, I have
please?
17106 as those in favor. That can't be right.
Should be 180 something.
It's 232.86, sorry.
230 what?
I have 232.86, that is 5 times 30.9.
So tonight's
Yeah, we'd be doing the,
cut is 30.9 of the pie?
yes, yes.
The
each-
Timberlane?
Each Timberlane vote would be 30.9.
So I'm getting 171.06 in favor. Is that the same number you have?
Well, it's the first number I had.
That is, well,
Is that the number you got?
both of us got the same
All right,
number,
we're
so
gonna go
that's
with
the
that
number.
one.
Because it's 5 times 30.9 plus
Right. plus
16.56.
Right.
And then you can just subtract that off 299.3, I think.
Okay, so 17106 in favor, 144.6 opposed.
Okay. So the amendment passes. So now we have a motion on the floor, an amended motion on the floor, and there was a second on that amendment. Are there any further amendments to the minutes? Okay, all in favor of the amended minutes?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Pretty much think they're going to go, so it's 11. Let's start that again. I do want the record to reflect the number. We have 7 Timberlane, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Hampstead.
No, are you voting yes?
1, 2, 3, 4. Jim's not voting. 4 Hampstead. Okay,
Okay.
All opposed?
got it.
Unopposed? Okay, so the amended minutes are approved. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is the nomination of the Assistant Superintendent.
I'm sorry, do we have the non-public minutes?
Oh, yes, sorry, thank you.
Please click on and pass along. These are sealed non-public. Session 1 is on one side, and Session 2 is on the other side. No, that's okay. Almost here.
Make a motion to approve the non-public minutes of April 15, 2019, session 1.
Motion. Sheila, Mrs. Lowe's seconds the motion for approval of the non-public session 1. All in favor? It's unanimous.
Should we,
Non-public session number 2.
no, but should we, these are sealed right now?
These are already
Sealed.
sealed.
So we'll keep them sealed.
I'll make a motion to approve these minutes.
Mrs. Lowe's
Session
makes a
2.
motion to approve session 2. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Boyle seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? You can pass those down. The next item on the agenda is the nomination of the Assistant Superintendent. Before we get started with the search committee, I do want to open this by saying that I am, I appreciate all the work that was done by the committee and the volunteers from the public. But I am, and I don't want to speak for the Timberlane Board, but I feel that the process was not as it should be. Just for those that are not aware of this, the SAU Board 55 never met to discuss the Assistant Superintendent search as a board. The Timberlane Board did request that a meeting be held of the SAU55 Board. That request was not honored. There was an SAU55 meeting that was supposed to be scheduled. During that time frame, there was no meeting that was held. The Timberlane Board requested that 3 candidates be put forward as part of the nomination process to the SAU55 Board. My understanding is that that will not be the case.
Can I just add something really quick to that, Dr. Farah?
Sure.
In response to that, as we stated in the last meeting, we put forth that request to the committee, and the committee decided after much deliberation and, as the process was completed and we went through all the steps, that one particular individual stood out. Had it been close, then more candidates, then the committee might have decided to bring forth more than one candidate. One particular candidate stood out. So I object to the insinuation that that request was not put forth to the committee or honored, because it was, and it was discussed.
Okay, I did not insinuate that that request wasn't put forward.
Well, at the last meeting.
And if I
at
did, I
this-
apologize.
Okay.
I did not mean to insinuate that was, I just said, all I said was that the Timberlane Board had requested that.
Okay. And as the representative for that board, I did bring that request forward to the committee, and it was discussed at length.
Thank you. Mrs. Lowe's? Oh,
Well,
Mrs. Silva, sorry.
Well, Mike, I also have concerns with the process and how that looked, and despite having those concerns, I did go to the open forum for the public when that interview process was happening, and quite honestly, I felt like we had 3 people before us with their own sets of strengths, but I was sitting there feeling as though this board is responsible for hiring that position, and this board never met to weigh in to even look at what the expectations were or what we were looking for in the next assistant superintendent. So it was really hard to look at those strengths and see how they would fit into the hiring process when I think a very basic part of the process was skipped.
Mrs. Lowe's?
I am going to 100% agree with both of you. I felt like I'm sitting here right now feeling like, personally, I have a lack of information on the whole process. I mean, I have this piece of paper with the process here and what they went through, but information as far as to this board or any input, we did not have the chance to do that. We did not have the chance to give any input. Yes, Sarah, you did ask us over and over again.
Okay, then
What
you
I
did
am
have a
saying
chance.
is, excuse me,
You did
I have the
a
floor.
chance.
What I am saying is, from the beginning, before the search committee was even chosen, we did not sit as a board. Timberlane we did not have this forum. We did not have an inkling of what it was going to be going forth. I did also notice, which I have personally a problem coming from Sandown, which we've discussed, Sarah, is that I understand that the old chair, Mr. Cipriano, picked the executive committee. The executive committee picked the people on the board. on the committee underneath. It seems to me that every town was represented except for Sandown. Sandown didn't have any representation on that committee. I believe there was representation from Atkinson, there was representation from Danville, Plastow, Hampstead, but no representation from Sandown. Personally, I don't think that was correct, but that's how I feel. So with that said, Dr. Farrow, I'd like to make a motion and restart the search.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
There's a second? Is there any discussion on the motion, Mrs. Parnell?
I'd like to be able to speak to this because, as with Sarah, I sat on this committee. I can assure you all, and I know it wasn't done the way you would like, we did, for the record, follow the policy that we have on the books as far as how you appoint people. Hours and hours were spent by this committee. We had representatives from every part of the community. I understand your concern that somebody was not from Sandown, but we had a community member who represented Timberlane, as well as teachers, support staff, administrators. I feel by putting forth this motion, and if you choose to vote to do this, you are negating even the respect that you should be giving to the community and to the representatives who sat on that committee to at least let us talk about the process and give the nominee a chance to be at least put forward. Personally, I could not be more proud of the work that was done. I felt it was entirely a collaborative effort, and I never felt like anyone was being undermined. Everyone was listened to. I mean, we sat in here with 13 people, many, many meetings, in addition to extensive interviews and site visits. I feel it's disrespectful to the SAU55 community to not at least listen to the information we were ready to present this evening.
Hang on. I understand that, and on the flip side, though, it goes back to, in terms of being disrespectful, the Timberlane board requested to have input before the search process started. On more than one occasion, our board was shut out.
But we do have a policy in place.
The policy speaks to the establishment of the search committee. Prior practice dictated that the SAU board would meet and have a discussion as to the qualifications that they were looking for in an assistant superintendent. So I do agree, the policy was met, but the board as an SAU did not meet. And so there's a fundamental issue with the start of the process, and unfortunately, I think it impacted the rest of the process. I'll let Mr. Boyle go, and then back to you, Mrs. Parnell.
Okay, my thoughts on this subject really haven't changed in the last 6 months, and I have a lot of respect for, I think, I'm sure the committee did a great job. The fact is, the way it's a process thing, the way this thing was set up, it should have started with the board, even though there is a policy giving these incredible powers, if you will, to one person, i.e. a chair, whoever sits in that chair. When you look at the importance of this position, this is your assistant superintendent of schools. We are collectively put in place by our 5 towns to do the business of SAU55, not one person. I know Mrs. Deotis very well. Mrs. Deotis was just there in my opinion, as a highly experienced educator, not really there representing the town of Atkinson. And that's my thoughts. And I do understand your position here, Sheila. So the people who sit in this room representing the town of Atkinson are myself and Jennifer Silver. I don't like the fact that we were shut out, and it really, Sarah, it's got nothing to do with you, Sarah. Sarah, you might have come back to the board to get input. Input is not the same as board discussion on anything we do. That's why things are brought to this board. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the same people rise to the top. You've got some good, all three of those candidates that I saw at the PAC a month ago looked very strong to me. But I have no idea if 10 people applied or 100 people applied. And I just think doesn't make sense to me when you've got, we've got a superintendent who is, he's running our district, he's doing a great job. I know he's been on 3 interviews. The world, I don't know what, I wish him the best, but see, I want to make sure as we proceed, we're doing the right thing as a district. So that's why I'm just not a fan of, I never cared for this process 6 months ago, and I was hoping that this was going to come up at the last SAU meeting. But we have been unsuccessful as a board to get an SAU meeting to address what is one of the biggest functions of this board.
Mr. Sherman?
I would request that the policy that Mrs. Parnell is referring to be available to us. It had been in our it's not in our packet tonight, but the policy that we have to form the search committee, there's a policy, not what Mr. Boyle's referring to, that the chairman of the SAU had the power, but the whole committee. What policy is that again? I don't have it with me. I didn't think I needed it tonight.
BBBH, I think.
If someone has it, or we could get copies, I'd like to look at it again. Because if we're gonna vote for this and start the process again, then you darn better sure that you're following the policy for the process. I don't believe the process was flawed at all, so. That's my request, that we get the policy.
I believe I have the correct.
I can pass it here. I printed it out today because I was wondering what it was, and looking at policy code BBBH, and
It's BBBH?
Yep, BBBH.
I used to know that one by heart.
And section E, election of SAU professional staff. Now, that's what I had a question on today, is what process wasn't followed according to this? I understand, Brian, what you're saying, like not agreeing with it, but if there was something not followed I was curious, because I wasn't involved in the beginning.
Let me answer that. The policy was followed, but the process typically would be that the SAU board would meet to discuss what they were looking for in the assistant superintendent. Say, for instance, that there was a gap in, I don't know, and this is the letters back, foreign language, that the assistant superintendent is the driver of that, okay? And you wanted a candidate, you need that candidate to have that expertise. Say it was foreign language, say it was facilities, say it was, this board is the one that defines what it is that we're looking for in the assistant superintendent before it goes out to the search committee. It's just like I write the job description for a new faculty member that I want in my department before I send it out to the search committee. Because if I don't, and the search committee's just, maybe that's the person they want. Yeah, those qualifications are good, but that doesn't do me any good if I need an analytical chemist and the search committee hires a biochemist. So that's what we're talking about here. Sorry, Mr. Smith, I'll take it back to you.
Yeah, just a question on, is this the first time the board, it's only my second meeting, is this the first time the board has seen what they were looking for in the search? This piece of paper?
Yes.
Yes.
We have not met
Yes.
as a board.
Yes.
No, I understand, not asking if you've met as a board, is
yes.
this the first
Yes,
time that
yes,
the?
it's a yes, yes. Dr. Metzler?
I've been here for 7 years. We've hired an assistant superintendent. There was no board discussion about what the board was looking for when we hired Dr. Wilson.
I'm sorry, I have to correct you. I do have those, I did read those minutes.
It wasn't any different than what we did this time, except for this particular process was far more comprehensive than the process we followed several years ago when we hired Dr. Wilson.
I'm sorry, but there were minutes reflecting the board's discussion prior to the.
The board discussion was the same kind of discussion that they had where the chair assigned, I believe, Karen Yusenko and Sue Sherman, and then we went out and formed a team and and brought a candidate forward.
And
That's what
That's what the chair did?
the length of the discussion.
But it doesn't,
The chair
There was
charged.
discussion.
I follow, if you're the chair now, and I understand you may have a different idea about how you think it should happen, I get that. And if you directed us to do what we were directed to do, we did what we were directed to do. Form a search committee with the 2 candidates that were selected from the SAU board. You know, the job description is a job description. It's pretty standard assistant superintendent job description. You can kick and punch it, but they're pretty standard across the state. I don't think that's up for debate. And we did what the board asked us to do. So the board changes, so now the board wants to do something different. I get that. But the process was followed, the process was comprehensive, and the process was far more comprehensive than it has ever been in the past for the assistant superintendent. This board has typically followed a pretty extensive process when looking for a superintendent, and then the rest of the employees, you act on my recommendations typically. You know, you have 2 other employees that we would follow, put a team together, whether it was the business administrator, HR director, or assistant superintendent. But the board didn't write the job description for anybody in the past. That's not accurate. It's not accurate.
I'm not saying that the board wrote a job description in the past, but I was just.
Well, that's what we were alluding to 5 minutes ago, that the board needed to weigh in and write a job description. That's not what the board does. That's what you hired me to do. That's what you hired me to do. If you want to do it, that's fine, but that's what you hired me to do.
I'd appreciate it if you would just keep your tone of voice level. I'm not saying that the board is going to write the job description. And if it came across that way, I apologize. In the past, the board has discussed the search, the assistant superintendent search. In this case, that did not happen. The board never met to discuss that search, regardless if it was just a discussion about who wants to be on that search, what's the process. That was never done with this board. This board did not meet to discuss the assistant superintendent search at all.
I would defer to the 2 people that were on the past search. The chair can direct that work. You're the chair. Previous chair directed the work, and Mrs. Yusenko and Sue Sherman can speak to their experiences in the past. You were not on the board when that took place.
No, but I did read the minutes that the board discussed it.
They can let you know how it happened.
Okay. All right. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Mrs. Parnell?
I just have to say, I hear a lot of discussion on this board about treating people with respect, wanting to be listened to, etc. I also hear what Mr. Boyle's saying about feeling, and Mrs. Flo's, about not feeling like there were appropriate representatives. I cannot strongly enough say that I think you are disrespecting the community of this SAU as an entirety, and I actually feel the people we had were incredibly representative of this community, of these school districts, and they care deeply about this. I mean, the other piece to me that really bothers me about just setting this aside and not even letting it be presented is that a lot of these people who were on this committee are going to be involved much longer than any of us are. We serve our term, and that's fine. Some of us serve more than one. We have teachers and support staff and administrators that are here for their entire career. And I highly value the input they gave and the way they contributed to this process. I know everyone's going to vote their own way, but to not even let this be presented, I'm honestly kind of speechless.
Mrs. McNamara?
I'd like to reiterate as well what Mrs. Parnell said. The individuals on this committee are key stakeholders in our 2 districts. They are the ones that are going to be working daily with the individual that takes this position, whether it's our candidate that we present tonight or a future candidate, to completely set aside their voice and their work and the input that they added throughout the entire process. They're the ones that know what the assistant superintendent job really entails because they're the ones that work with the individual on a daily basis. So to work with them as closely as we did, to listen to what they had to say at all of the meetings and when they returned from their visits, had a huge impact in our final decision. And to just disregard all of that work, the time out of the classrooms, the time out of their schools, the time that they took away from families to drive to different site visits, and all of that is so disrespectful. And I just, thank you to everybody that worked on the committee, truly.
Mr. Boyle?
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm just the opposite of, this board was shown the most incredible disrespect. You just can't even begin. I can sense your frustration, Kate. I get it. That's where we've been for over
Okay,
6
wait a
months.
minute. No,
We have been.
no.
Let him go.
That's where the majority of this board has been, and I honest to God have no idea why this board was shut out from that process. So, and this board is a volunteer board, and we do, that's great, they put all those hours in. Welcome to our world.
They
As
volunteered.
well.
Welcome to our world. What do you think we do?
But then you're coming back to what everyone here said we should not do at the last meeting, that we should move forward and try to
I am
make
moving
progress.
forward.
No, this
It's
is payback
It's
for
the
not.
same thing that happened in that
Point
meeting.
of order.
It's the same thing today. It's
Point of
payback.
order.
Okay.
Payback.
Point of order.
Just use
And
Jason's
you're
name.
putting two districts on the line for your personal payback.
My personal
Yep.
payback.
Just
Yes.
because you weren't involved in it
the education
personally.
of our
Point of
kids.
order.
You want to have your hand in
Point of
everything.
order.
You think you are the
Chair,
superintendent.
point of order.
This is your saying.
Okay.
I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Mrs. Belcher, could you read back the motion, please?
Mrs. Lowe's motion to restart the search process, it was seconded by Mr. Boyle.
All in favor?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Timberlane.
Proposition to vote. Proposition to vote.
Oh, sorry. All opposed? 2 Timberlane, 5 Hampstead.
Those in favor is 154.5. Those opposed, 144.61.
The motion carries.
Well, of course it does with weighted voting.
No quorum, the meeting's over, I guess, huh?
Since you think
Kim,
you
is that
know
it?
more than anybody.
And that's it? No quorum? Meeting's over?
No, that's incorrect.
No?
Mr. Brock, once a meeting is called to order with a quorum, do you need a quorum to continue the meeting?
Yes.
Yes, you do? Okay.
That's it.
You
Good
were
night.
wrong again, Kim. Okay.
Payback.
I don't understand the paybacks.